Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I've been a full-time faculty member for over 16 years. For about half of that time, I have been involved with the faculty evaluation process, both in my departments and at the college level. I've served on committees that review faculty materials and then make decisions to approve or deny their applications. Because of my experience, people often come to me and ask, hey, is this specific thing I've done, is it going to count for my tenure case? And that's a really good question because there's not a simple yes or no answer to that question. I thought today it would be nice if I would share 3 keys you need to keep in mind when you are preparing for your tenure application to know what counts for tenure and what might not. If you watch all the way to the end, I'm also going to share some of my top tips in preparing your tenure or reappointment case to be successful. First important thing you need to do is look at the actual policies and guideline documents that your institution publishes so that you know exactly what they say. The next important step when you're preparing your tenure file is to consider how you're going to describe what you've done. You don't just make a list. You need to indicate the significance, the relevance to the criteria, and the impact of each of the items that you've mentioned for all areas, teaching, service, and scholarship. Don't just put it down and then hope that the committee members will understand what it is you've done and why it's important. It's your responsibility to describe that, the significance and impact of the work that you've done and how it relates to the specific criteria. The final thing, that's probably the most important thing, is you need to be aware of how the policy is actually enacted. How do the members of the evaluation committee interpret that policy? What do they think it means? And how are they going to apply it? What are their values around the policy? What types of things do they approve or not approve? So I thought I would share a few examples that I know about of how even when the policy is there and someone clearly explains what they have done, you still need to find out what the people on your evaluation committee think about how the policy should be applied. Here's the first story. It's from when I previously served on a college level committee for promotion and tenure. So I would look at people's applications and then work with the committee members to approve or deny their applications. On this particular committee, there are around 10 or 15 individuals serving. The person had completed an application for full professor, and that college documentation included a very specific rubric or matrix of what was required for teaching, service, and scholarship. When I looked through the application, I felt that all of those criteria had been met and they should be promoted to full professor. When the committee members met, a committee member or two said, I don't think they've met all of the criteria. The reason they thought this is because in the actual documentation, it said that the person going up for full had to have a leadership role on a university level committee. It used that specific phrase and terminology, university leadership position or role on a university level committee. And a couple of people on the evaluation committee did not think that this applicant met that requirement. When I looked through the documentation, the applicant had served in a leadership role for a very large division of the institution, and they were responsible for the daily operations of that division. And it had a significant impact on the university. Other committee members thought that it was not committee service, so it shouldn't count. And I said, well, but they served a significant part of the university. So while the policy seemed clear in my mind, there were different perspectives on how to interpret that policy and what it meant. The applicant themselves had made clear the case for their work, its importance, the impact, and the relevance to the criteria. However, some of those evaluation committee members did not feel it was sufficient. But most of us felt that it met the spirit of the law, even if it didn't meet the letter of the law of serving on a specific committee. The service work did have a significant impact on the university. Eventually, that person's application for full professor was approved, but it was after much debate about how to interpret that policy. But I really understood that just because you think a policy is clear does not mean that other people understand it the same way, which is why it's important to get perspectives from others in how to understand the policy. The next example I'd like to give is from one of my former colleagues. I was not on that person's evaluation committee, but the person shared this story with several people in the department so we could be sure to understand and meet the expectations for our applications in the future. Again, this is an example of a person applying for full professor, but it could have happened at any level of the application and reappointment process. So this colleague of mine had several international presentations and publications. The teaching and service expectations were clearly met. As part of this person's application materials, they had listed a conference presentation and a journal article, which is pretty similar when you do a conference presentation and then you do some revisions and submit that for publication in a journal. That's pretty common, right? So this person did the same thing. They had presented at an international conference, and at the conclusion of the conference, they took the feedback and information from the presentation and submitted it as a journal article. They submitted it to a journal that had close ties with the conference. So it was similar to the situation of a proceedings. However, there was not an automatic publication based on presenting at the conference. Once the conference was finished, the submission was a separate process to that journal, and it was a peer-reviewed process that was masked just as normal. And she went through that process, and the article was published. However, when the committee reviewed those materials, they were not satisfied that it was two separate outputs for her research efforts. Even though it was nowhere written, kind of an unspoken rule, that a presentation at a conference and a publication in a journal directly related to that conference does not count as two separate outputs for scholarship, even though she could have had two separate outputs if she had done the conference presentation and submitted it to a completely different journal. That's not how it was viewed in this case because the journal itself had close ties with the conference. So the evaluation committee denied that promotion to full professor. Nowhere in the wording of the policy did it indicate that that would not be counted because it was a peer-reviewed journal process, but the committee viewed it as not the same as an independent journal peer review process. Clearly, members of that committee had their own opinions and ideas about how the policy would be interpreted, which is another example of why it's important to be in communication with people who will serve on your committee or potentially serve on your committee to get their perspectives. Eventually, that person did apply again and was awarded full professor. It was nice of the person to share with us so that we could all learn what to do in our own situations. The final example I'd like to share is from my own personal experience. I mentioned it a bit ago when I was trying to decide between applying for reappointment and going ahead and applying for tenure. I'll link that video above and you can watch that if you'd like. But the point is during that process, I met with my department head. And during that conversation, we looked at my CV. We went line by line, what would count or not count, what was valued and not valued within my specific department. Of course, everything on the CV shows the work that I'm doing and that I'm making contributions, but there are some things that are going to count more importantly and be weighted more heavily in the tenure application. Now, I'd already read the tenure policy in my department, and I'm going to show it to you here, and you'll see that it says professional activities related to research include monographs, scholarly articles, book reviews, and edited collections of essays and so forth. So editing a volume of a journal or a book. Pay special note to where it says book reviews are counted, right? So I read this policy, and when I was counting up my publications, I have one book review that was published in a peer-reviewed journal. So I sent it in, it went through the review process, it was a revise and resubmit, I resubmitted, and it was published. So when I read this description, I assumed that that publication would count. It would be one of the required ones for my tenure case. When I met with my department head, however, he indicated that it was not sufficient for my tenure case. I even pulled it up and showed it to him, and he said, well, yes, for annual evaluation, book reviews do count, but it is not considered a scholarly publication for your tenure case. So in my institution, well, in my specific department, I need 1 book or 4 articles published in peer-reviewed journals. So I thought, since the book review was published in a peer-reviewed journal, that it would count for my tenure case here, because it had counted previously in my other institution. That means I need to submit some more articles before I apply for tenure. Going through that process line by line really helped me understand more about what's valued and the perspective in the department. I mean, I read the policy and I thought I understood how it was written and what it said and that I was ready. But when I met with my department head, I gathered additional information. This is just another example of following the policy, but then making sure that you communicate with people, because here a review is considered almost like service instead of scholarly work. So again, my point is, nothing counts or doesn't count for your tenure case. You need to check the pulse of your specific department and your institution, and with specific people that could serve on your evaluation committee. Check in with several people within your department and then outside of your department, maybe at the college level or division, depending on how your institution's organized. Meet with them, show them items on your CV, show them specifically the work you've done, talk about book reviews, and so forth. It's also important not to just ask one person, but get perspective from several people and meet with your department head regularly and with members of the committee so that you get various perspectives and learn more about how to write a successful tenure application at your institution. Now I have 2 extra tips for you. Please do not wait until it is time to apply for tenure to start reaching out to people to find out what the value system is. Once you're in your 2nd year, you should already be having some conversations with people about your specific trajectory, the work that you've already submitted, what you're planning to submit, so you'll know if you're on the right track or if you might need to navigate slightly differently. The other important tip is, just because someone says, yes, that counts, you need the other perspectives, but you also need to be able to clearly articulate the significance of that specific piece of work that you did and the relevance of that work to the criteria. And finally, you'll want to discuss the impact. Of course you did that work, but what was the outcome? What was the benefit of that? So those are some of my tips. I hope that it will be helpful for you as you go through your tenure process. And if you have additional questions, please put them below, because I really enjoy answering them. If you'd like more information like this, you can check out my weekly newsletter where I give tips and ideas and helpful support on the tenure life. So that link is down in the description. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. When you give that thumbs up, it's just like when you go in contact with your peers and say, hey, what's valuable here? That helps me know what videos you like and what I should do more of. So like and subscribe. Until next time, keep exploring to find what works for you.